You avoid starting because you are terrified of looking stupid. You attempt a new venture. You hit a single roadblock, and your fragile ego convinces you to quit. You view failure as an indictment of your identity, and that single toxic perspective is the exact reason you have remained stagnant for the last decade. It is time to change the equation. There is a very specific kind of tension that builds over time. It doesn't look like failure on the surface. It looks like hesitation, delay, overthinking. You tell yourself you are being careful. You tell yourself you are preparing. You tell yourself you are waiting for the right time. But if you look closely, you are not waiting. You are avoiding the moment where your ability gets exposed, avoiding the possibility that you try, and it's not good enough, because what you actually fear is not failure itself. It's the feeling that comes with it, the moment when something doesn't work. And your mind immediately translates that into something personal. I'm not good at this. This isn't for me. People are going to see this. And just like that, a simple outcome becomes a threat to your identity. So you delay. Let me give you a familiar scene. You've been thinking about starting something. A business, a project, a new direction. You've watched videos, read articles, maybe even build a plan. From the outside, it looks like progress. But weeks pass, then months, and nothing actually starts. Because every time you get close to action, your brain introduces a condition. It needs to be better first. I need to understand more. I don't want to do this wrong. That's not preparation. That's perfectionism, disguised as intelligence. And perfectionism is not about high standards. It is about emotional protection. You're trying to eliminate the possibility of feeling inadequate. So instead of risking a visible failure, you choose an invisible one. You stay in planning mode, safe, controlled, unproven. Now layer something else on top of that. Comparison. You scroll, you observe, you see people who are not more talented than you, but they are moving, they are building, launching, experimenting, and part of you knows you could do that, maybe better, but you're not, and that creates a quiet form of envy, not loud, not obvious, but persistent, because it's not about what they have. It's about what you are not doing. You watch them make mistakes publicly. You watch them improve over time. And instead of feeling inspired, you feel stuck, because they are operating in reality, and you are operating in theory. Let me ask you something. How long have you been preparing for something you still haven't started? Be honest, because at some point, preparation stops being useful and starts becoming avoidance. And the longer you stay there, the more pressure builds. Not external pressure, internal. You begin to feel behind, not compared to others, but compared to your own potential. You know you're capable of more, but your actions don't reflect it. So you create explanations. I'm just being strategic. I don't want to rush. I'm waiting for clarity. But underneath all of that, there is a simpler truth. You are protecting your ego. You are trying to maintain the image of being competent without putting it at risk. Because as long as you don't fully try, you can always tell yourself, I could have done it. That illusion is comfortable. But it is also limiting. Because potential that is never tested is just imagination. And this is where the real cost appears. Not in failure, but in stagnation. Days feel full, but nothing moves forward. Effort is spent, but nothing compounds. You are active, but not progressing. And over time, that creates something heavier than failure. Doubt, not about a single action, but about yourself. Maybe I'm not the kind of person who does this. Maybe I miss my window. Maybe it's too late to start. None of that comes from reality. It comes from inaction. Because unless you test yourself against reality, the more your mind fills the gap with assumptions. And most of those assumptions are wrong. But they feel real because they are unchallenged. Think about that. You're letting untested thoughts define what you believe is possible. So the cycle continues. Avoid, delay, doubt, avoid again. And the longer it runs, the harder it becomes to interrupt. Not because you lost ability, but because you lost momentum. So here is the uncomfortable truth. You are not stuck because you failed too many times. You are stuck because you have not failed enough in a way that produces clarity. You have been circling the arena, studying it, analyzing it, but never stepping in. And as long as you stay there, your life remains theoretical, safe but unrealized. So the real question is not, why am I not succeeding? It is this: are you avoiding failure, or are you avoiding the feeling that failure might reveal something about you? Because your answer to that question explains almost everything. What you have been taught about failure is fundamentally incorrect, not slightly inaccurate, not incomplete, wrong at the level of how your brain actually works. Because you were taught to see failure as the opposite of success, as something to avoid, minimize, hide. But biologically, that model does not exist. Your brain does not learn through success. It learns through error. Let that land. Success feels good. It reinforces what you already know, but it does not force change. Error does. When you attempt something and it doesn't work, your brain detects a gap, a discrepancy between what you expected and what actually happened. That gap is not just psychological. It is neurological. Your brain registers it as a signal. Something here is incorrect. Update required. And in that moment, a cascade begins. Neurons that fired incorrectly are adjusted. Connections that are inefficient are weakened or rewired. New pathways begin forming to correct the mistake. This is called neuroplasticity. And it does not activate at full strength when things go smoothly. It activates when something breaks. So when you avoid failure, you are not avoiding pain. You are avoiding the very signal that tells your brain how to improve. Think about how backwards that is. You are trying to get better while systematically avoiding the only mechanism that creates improvement. Let me ask you something. Have you ever repeated something you already know and felt productive but didn't actually improve? That's because repetition without error is maintenance, not growth. Now contrast that with a moment where something didn't work. You missed a shot. You said the wrong thing. The plan failed. It's uncomfortable, but it's also precise. Because now you have information you didn't have before. What didn't work, where it broke, what needs to change. That is data. And this is where most people make the critical mistake. They don't process failure as data. They process it as identity. I fail becomes I am a failure. This didn't work becomes I'm not good at this. That shift is subtle but destructive. Because the moment failure becomes personal, you stop analyzing it. You start protecting yourself from it. You avoid similar situations. You lower your exposure. You retreat to what feels safe. And just like that, you cut yourself off from the feedback loop that creates growth. Now layer in dopamine. Your brain is constantly predicting outcomes. When something goes better than expected, you get a positive signal. When something goes worse than expected, you get a negative signal. That negative signal is not punishment. It is instruction. It tells your brain, update your model. This is called a prediction error signal, and it is one of the most important drivers of learning. But here's the problem. If you avoid situations where your predictions can be wrong, you eliminate the signal. No signal, no update, no growth. So your model of the world stays the same. Even if it's flawed, this is why people can stay stuck for years. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they are not generating enough error signals to force adaptation. They are operating inside a narrow band of certainty, where everything feels controlled but nothing evolves. Let me give you a simple contrast. Two people start learning a new skill. One of them practices only what they can already do. They stay comfortable, controlled. The other deliberately attempts things just beyond their ability. They make mistakes. They adjust. They repeat. After a few months, the difference is obvious, not because one had more talent, but because one exposed their brain to more error, more data, more updates, and over time, that compounds. This is the difference between stagnation and adaptation. So the real problem is not that you fail. It's that you interpret failure incorrectly. You treat it as a stop signal, when it is actually a direction signal. You treat it as evidence of limitation, when it is actually evidence that you are at the edge of your current capacity. Think about that. The moment something doesn't work is not the moment to step back. It is the moment where the most valuable information becomes available. But only if you can see it without emotion. And that is the shift from, I failed, something is wrong with me, to, this failed, something needs to be adjusted. That one change removes ego from the equation. And once ego is removed, failure becomes usable, precise, neutral, actionable. Let me ask you directly, when something doesn't work in your life, do you analyze it or do you internalize it? Because one leads to growth, the other leads to avoidance. And most people don't realize they made that choice years ago. They chose comfort over correction. They chose identity protection over skill development. And now they're trying to improve without exposing themselves to the very mechanism that creates improvement. So here's the truth. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the raw material of it. And if you are not actively generating it, studying it, and adjusting based on it, then you are not building anything. You are maintaining what you already are. The question is that enough for you? There's a reason Michael Jordan is used so often as an example of greatness. But most people misunderstand why. They point to talent, athleticism, natural ability. That's the surface level explanation. The real difference was something far less visible and far more uncomfortable. He did not experience failure the way most people do. He processed it differently. Most people remember the quote, "I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career." They hear it as inspiration. But they miss the mechanism behind it. Because Jordan was not simply failing a lot. He was extracting information at a level most people never reach. Every missed shot was not emotional. It was diagnostic. Angle, timing, foot placement, defender position, release speed. While others felt frustration, he was collecting data. Think about that. The same event, missing a shot, creates two completely different outcomes. For most people, miss frustration, self-doubt, hesitation. For Jordan, misanalysis, adjustment, repetition, same input, different system. That is what separates elite performers. Not the absence of failure, but the absence of emotional distortion around failure. Let me give you a clearer picture. Imagine two players taking the same shot and missing. The first player reacts immediately. He shakes his head, feels the miss, carries it into the next play. His confidence drops slightly. His mechanics tighten. His decision-making becomes more cautious. Now the second player, Jordan's model. He registers the miss but does not attach meaning to it. No identity, no story. Just a question. What specifically broke? Was it the arc? Too flat, too much force, late release. The mind stays neutral because neutrality allows precision, and precision allows correction. This is where most people fail long before success ever becomes possible. They are not defeated by failure itself. They are defeated by the interpretation of failure. They turn a mechanical problem into a psychological burden. And once that happens, their performance deteriorates because now they're not just executing. They are managing emotion At the same time, Jordan removed that layer. He stripped failure down to its functional components. No drama, no identity, just feedback. And over time, that created a compounding advantage because every mistake improved the system. While others were repeating errors, he was refining them. This is what people don't understand about repetition. Repetition alone does not create mastery. Corrected repetition does. And you cannot correct what you refuse to examine. Let me ask you something. When something doesn't go your way, how quickly do you move into explanation? I wasn't focused. It just wasn't my day. I'll get it next time. Those are not explanations. They are escapes. They protect your ego, but they block your growth. Jordan didn't escape. He confronted, directly, repeatedly, thousands of times. And that is the part most people are not willing to replicate. They admire the outcome but avoid the process. Because the process requires emotional discipline. It requires you to look at your own performance without distortion, to see clearly where you were wrong without defending it, without softening it, without turning it into something it isn't. That level of honesty is rare, but it is necessary, because without it, you are not improving. You are just participating. Now consider the scale. Thousands of missed shots, thousands of micro-adjustments, each one small, almost insignificant on its own, but over time, they compound into precision, into instinct, into what looks like natural talent from the outside. But it wasn't natural. It was built through a system most people avoid. Failure analysis, adjustment, repetition. Again, and again, and again, until the margin of error becomes smaller than the competition. That is mastery, not perfection, but controlled adaptation. And this is where the real shift happens. You stop asking, how do I avoid failure? And you start asking, how do I use it more efficiently than everyone else? Because once you do that, failure stops being a threat. It becomes an advantage, a source of information that most people ignore. And that creates separation, quietly, consistently. So the question is not whether you are capable of performing at a higher level. The question is, are you willing to look at your mistakes with the same level of precision without protecting yourself from what you see? Because that is the standard. And once you adopt it, everything changes. There is a system running in the background of your life, silent, efficient, and designed for one purpose: to protect your ego at all costs. Not your growth, not your potential, not your future, your ego. And the way it does this is not obvious. It doesn't tell you, don't try. It tells you something far more reasonable. Not yet. I need more clarity. This isn't the right time. I should prepare more first. And because those thoughts sound intelligent, you trust them. But they are not strategic. They are protective. This is ego protection paralysis. A system where your mind fabricates logical reasons to avoid emotional risk. And the more intelligent you are, the more convincing those reasons become. Let me show you how it works. It starts with a trigger, an opportunity, a new direction, a situation where your ability will be tested. Immediately, your brain runs a prediction. This might not go well. That prediction creates tension. Not physical danger, but psychological exposure. You might fail. You might look inexperienced. You might not meet your own standard. And that is enough, because your brain interprets that as a threat to identity. So instead of moving forward, it activates a defense. Rationalization. You begin to think, I need a better plan. I should learn more before I start. I don't want to waste time doing it wrong. And on the surface, that sounds disciplined. But underneath, the function is clear. Delay action. Avoid exposure. Maintain identity. Let me give you a simple example. You decide you want to start something, a business, a new skill, a shift in direction. You sit down to begin, and within minutes, your mind redirects you. You open another tab, start researching, watching, comparing. You tell yourself this is part of the process. But hours pass and nothing has been built. No output, no feedback, no error, just input. That feels productive. But it's not progress. It's protection. Because as long as you stay in preparation, you never have to confront reality. And reality is where your current limits become visible. This is the core of the system. The brain prefers a guaranteed sense of competence in theory over a risk of incompetence in reality. So it keeps you in environments where you already feel capable, where your identity remains intact, where you can still say, I understand this, without ever proving it. Let me ask you something. How many things in your life do you understand but have never actually executed? That gap is where ego protection paralysis lives. And over time it expands. Because the longer you delay action, the more pressure builds around it. Now it's not just a task. It's a test. Now it matters more. Now failure feels heavier. Now the risk to your identity increases. So what do? You delay again, and the cycle continues. Trigger tension, rationalization, avoidance, temporary relief. That relief is important because it reinforces the system. The moment you decide, I'll start later, you feel better. The pressure drops. The discomfort disappears. And your brain registers that as success. Good. We avoided risk. So it strengthens the pattern. Next time, it happens faster, more automatically, with less resistance, until eventually, you don't even reach the point of action. You stop earlier, at the idea stage, at the planning stage, at the intention stage. And from the outside, your life looks stable. You're thoughtful, careful, strategic, but internally nothing is moving because movement requires exposure, and exposure threatens the ego. This is why some of the most intelligent people stay stuck the longest. They have more tools to justify inaction, more language to explain delay, more frameworks to avoid execution. They can build a perfect mental model and never test it. And here is where it becomes dangerous, because the system doesn't feel like fear. It feels like control. You feel like you're being deliberate, measured, responsible. But in reality, you are avoiding the only environment where growth happens. Uncertainty, feedback, error, correction. Let that land. You are not stuck because you lack opportunity. You are stuck because your mind is protecting you from the very conditions required to evolve. So the question is not, why am I not progressing? The question is, where in your life are you choosing the safety of your current identity over the expansion of your actual capability? Because every time you choose safety, you reinforce the system. And every time you reinforce it, it becomes harder to break until one day you are no longer avoiding action consciously. You simply don't act. And you call that normal. You call that your personality, your pace, your preference. But it's not. It's conditioning. So now the awareness becomes clear. The hesitation you feel is not a signal to wait. It is a signal that you are at the edge of something real, and your brain is trying to pull you back. The question is, do you listen to it, or do you finally step forward despite it? Because that decision is where paralysis ends and progress begins. Understanding failure intellectually is not enough, because in the moment it happens, you don't feel like a scientist. You feel it, the tension, the frustration, the immediate urge to explain away or move on as quickly as possible. And that is exactly where most people lose the benefit. They experience failure, but they never extract anything from it. So the same mistake repeats, slightly disguised, slightly delayed, but fundamentally unchanged. That's why you need a system, not to avoid failure, but to process it correctly. This is the data extraction method. Its purpose is simple: remove emotion, capture information, apply correction. Nothing more, nothing extra. Step 1, what broke? Most people skip this, or they answer it vaguely. It didn't work. I messed up. That wasn't good. That is not analysis. That is avoidance. Because if you don't define the failure precisely, you cannot fix it. So you slow down, and you isolate the exact point of breakdown, not the outcome, the mechanism. If a presentation failed, what exactly broke? Was it the structure, the clarity of the message, the delivery, the timing? If a business attempt failed, what broke? The offer, the targeting, the execution, the consistency? You are not allowed to say everything, because everything is emotional language. Precision forces honesty. Let me ask you something. When something goes wrong in your life, how often do you actually isolate the exact failure point? Or do you collapse it into a general feeling and move on? Because without specificity, there is no correction. Step 2, why did it break? Now you go one layer deeper. Not just what failed, but why it failed. This is where most people protect themselves. They stop at surface-level explanations. I wasn't focused. I didn't try hard enough. It just didn't work out. Those are not reasons. They are shields. So you go further. You ask, what variable was missing or miscalibrated? Skill? Strategy? Execution? Environment? Be specific. If it's skill, what skill exactly? If it's strategy, what assumption was wrong? If it's execution, where did consistency break? Because every failure has a structure, and if you don't identify that structure, you will repeat it. This step requires something most people avoid: non-defensive honesty. No protecting your image. No softening the truth. Just clarity. Because clarity is what allows change. Let that sink in. You don't improve by trying harder. You improve by seeing more clearly. Step 3. What is a new variable? This is where transformation actually happens. Because insight without change is useless. So now you define what will be different on the next attempt. Not everything. One variable. Specific, measurable, intentional. If your last attempt failed due to poor structure, the next attempt focuses on structure. If it failed due to lack of consistency, the next attempt focuses on execution rhythm. You do not change 5 things at once, because then you don't know what worked. You isolate, adjust, test. This is how systems evolve. Let me give you a simple example. You try something. It fails. Instead of saying, I'll do better next time, you say, next attempt, I will shorten the message by 30% and focus only on one core idea. Now you have a variable. Now you can measure. Now you can learn. And this is where the shift becomes real. You stop reacting to failure and start engineering your response to it. Core principle: failure is data. Emotion is noise. This is the foundation. Failure gives you information. Emotion distorts it. The moment you take failure personally, you lose access to its value. So the discipline is not just to act, but to observe without distortion. To look at what happened without turning it into a story about yourself. Because the moment it becomes identity, you stop using it. And once you stop using failure, you stop improving. Common mistakes that break the system. There are predictable ways people sabotage this process. The first is overgeneralization. They say, I'm just not good at this. That ends a loop immediately. No analysis. No adjustment. Just conclusion. The second is emotional avoidance. They move on too quickly. They don't sit with a failure long enough to understand it. They escape the discomfort and lose the data. The third is random iteration. They try again, but without changing anything specific, or they change everything at once. Both lead to the same result: no clear signal, no real progress. And finally, the most dangerous one: switching paths too early. They fail once or twice and decide, this isn't for me. Not because the path is wrong, but because they never extracted the data that would make it work. So they reset. New idea, new start, same pattern. Again and again. Let me ask you directly, how many times have you experienced failure, but never actually studied it? How many times have you moved on without extracting anything useful? Because if that number is high, then your problem is not failure. It's waste. You are wasting the most valuable feedback available to you. So from this point forward, the standard is simple. You don't just experience failure. You process it. You break it down. You understand it. You adjust. And then you go again, not emotionally, but systematically. Because the people who win long-term are not the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who learn faster than everyone else. And learning faster is nothing more than this: seeing clearly, adjusting precisely, repeating relentlessly. That is the method. The only question is, will you actually use it? Slow down, not to understand, but to confront. Because everything up to this point only matters if you are willing to look at yourself without distortion. No explanation. No justification. No depends. Just truth. Let me ask you something. Right now, today, are your decisions being guided by growth or by protection? Not what you say, not what you intend, what you actually do, because those are not the same thing. You can say you want progress. You can say you want mastery. But if your actions are designed to avoid looking incompetent, then you are not building. You are preserving. Preserving an image, a reputation, a version of yourself that feels safe. And the cost of that is invisible at first. You don't lose immediately. You maintain. You stay where you are. You operate within what you already know. And from the outside, it looks stable. But internally, something shifts. Because you know you are holding back. You know there are moves you are not making, risks you are not taking, decisions you are postponing. Not because you don't understand them, but because you understand exactly what they might expose. Let that sit for a moment. Now ask yourself this: what are you currently avoiding that would immediately expand your capacity if you face it directly? Be precise. Is it a conversation, a decision, a new direction, something you already know but haven't acted on? Because the moment you identify that, you are looking directly at the edge of your growth, and right next to it is your ego, quietly negotiating. Maybe later. Not yet. I need more time. But here is the reality. Time is not the issue. Clarity is not the issue. Courage is. The willingness to step into a situation where your current ability might not be enough. Now go deeper. If you continue like this, same pattern, same avoidance, same protection, where does this lead? Not next week. 5 years, 10 years, a life where you stayed competent but never became exceptional? A life where you avoided embarrassment but also avoided evolution? A life where you look capable but never actually tested the limits of that capability? This is not dramatic. This is predictable, because what you repeatedly avoid becomes a boundary of your life. And if that boundary is defined by your ego's need to feel safe, then your life will always stay within what feels comfortable, not what is possible. Let me ask you directly, are you trying to become better? Or are you trying to feel better about where you are? Because those are two completely different pursuits. One requires exposure. The other requires avoidance. One builds something. The other maintains something. And you cannot fully do both. Now consider this. If no one was watching, no judgment, no perception, no reputation at stake, how differently would you act? What would you attempt? What would you risk? what would you stop overthinking? Because that version of you is closer to your actual potential, unfiltered, unprotected, and yet most people never access it. Not because they can't, but because they are too invested in how they are seen. So they make a trade. They trade long-term capability for short-term image. They trade growth for psychological comfort. And over time, that trade compounds until one day they are no longer choosing safety consciously. They are living inside it, calling it their personality, their style, their way of operating. But it's not. It's a pattern built on avoiding the one thing that would have changed everything: failure, not as an outcome, but as a process. So here's a question that cuts through all of it. Are you prioritizing protection of your fragile ego today over construction of your future? Because if the answer is yes, even partially, then you are not delayed. You are redirected away from growth toward maintenance. And that direction has consequences, quiet ones, invisible at first, but permanent over time. So now the decision becomes clear, not easy, but clear. Do you continue protecting who you are, or do you start building who you could become? Because one of those choices will define the rest of your life. And you are already making it every single day. To this point, there is nothing left to understand. You know the pattern. You see the system. You understand the cost. So now this is not about insight. This is about decision. Because everything you've just seen leads to a single line you cannot stand on forever. You are either in the arena or you are not. There is no middle. You can analyze. You can prepare. You can refine your thinking endlessly. But none of that replaces exposure. None of that builds capacity. Only contact with reality does. And reality does not care about your intentions. It responds to action. So let's remove the illusion. You are not waiting for the right time. You are waiting for the moment where action does not threaten your identity. That moment will never come. Because the threat is the point. The uncertainty, the possibility of failure, the discomfort of not being good yet. That is the arena. And if you avoid that, you avoid growth. Let me be direct. You do not become confident before you act. You become confident by surviving what you thought you couldn't. You do not eliminate fear before stepping forward. You step forward and realize the fear was never the barrier. Your interpretation of it was. So from this point forward, the standard changes. You don't ask, am I ready? You ask, what is the next action that exposes me to reality? And then you take it, not perfectly, not comfortably, but deliberately, because discipline is not intensity. It is consistency in uncomfortable conditions. It is the ability to execute while your mind is still negotiating with you, while part of you is saying, wait, delay, think more, and you move anyway. That is where the shift happens, not in a breakthrough moment, but in repeated decisions to act without certainty. Now understand this clearly. Stepping into the arena will cost you something. You will make mistakes. You will look inexperienced. You will produce results that do not match your expectations. That is guaranteed. But what you gain is something most people never build: feedback, adaptation, momentum. And once momentum starts, everything changes. Because now you are no longer guessing. You are interacting with reality. You are adjusting based on data. You are learning faster than the version of you that stayed on the outside. That is the advantage. Not talent, not timing. Speed of adaptation. So here is the shift you need to make. Stop trying to protect your performance. Start exposing it. Stop trying to feel ready. Start becoming capable. Stop waiting for clarity. Start generating it through action. Because clarity is not found. It is built, one attempt at a time. Let me ask you something. If you committed today to stepping into the arena, Not once, but consistently. How different would your life look in 6 months? Not perfect, but real, measured, tested, moving, because that is the only path forward. Not theory, not intention, execution. So here's a command. Pick the thing you've been avoiding, the one you keep thinking about but haven't acted on, and reduce it, not into something easy, but into something immediate. A single step that puts you in contact with reality. Then take it. Today. Not after this video. Not when you feel more confident. Now. Because the longer you wait, the stronger the pattern becomes. And the stronger the pattern becomes, the harder it is to break. This is not about motivation. This is about standard. From this point forward, you do not measure yourself by how you feel. You measure yourself by whether you step into the arena or stay outside of it. One builds something. The other preserves nothing. So decide, and then move. Because no one builds anything meaningful from the sidelines. From this point forward, you don't get to say you want more if your actions don't reflect it. You either step into the arena or you accept a life that comes from avoiding it. There is no third option. If you made it this far, you already know this isn't about failure. It's about whether you're willing to face it. Subscribe only if you're ready to stop protecting your ego and start using reality as your training ground. Because from this point forward, you either learn from failure or you stay exactly where you are.